Bob, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you here today in Seattle. I want to thank Mayor Nichols for his comments, and Michael, the Suquamish tribe, and its contributions to our event here today. I think the mayor should be proud not only of the accomplishments, the achievements of this city that he mentioned in his remarks, but I was so impressed this morning when I picked up the morning paper to see that the change in the artistic director of a local theater was on the front page of the paper, not the front page of the arts and leisure section, not the front page of some back section, but right below the fold on the front page of the paper. And there are very few cities, I think, in which the leadership of the press would pay that much attention to the workings of the art scene in the community. So I congratulate this city on its wonderful art scene. Today I'm going to talk about moving forward in the arts in the Obama era. Of course, I'm now an outsider. I was part of the transition, and so now my perspective is very much like yours. I'm watching this wonderful administration evolve, and I really feel that our still new administration constitutes a new and important beginning for our nation, and also will offer great opportunities for all of us in the arts. If, and this is an important if arts leadership can rise to the occasion. And I confidently predict that in 2017, all Americans will look back with gratitude for the work of an administration that is already reshaping in a very positive way the character of our democracy, aligning it with the needs of the 21st century. And I think that we will see a sturdy connection linking cultural heritage and art engagement and quality of life. And I think that will be part of the Obama legacy. Of course, we're looking forward with hope at what is clearly a time of crisis. We all know arts organizations are, in many cases, shrinking. Some, in fact, may be failing. I mean, only last week, AP reported that overall charitable giving fell in 2008, and that the arts, the cultural sector, dropped more than most. I noted in the New York Times that a number of Lower Manhattan arts organizations were trying to combine their efforts in order to counteract current financial challenges. Another article indicated more positively that the Doris Duke and James Irvine Foundations were reworking their grant making to accommodate the downturn. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the crisis at all, and I'm pleased that this meeting, with the exception of a few special sessions, doesn't concentrate on this crisis. Arts leaders, after all, are experts at managing scarcity. If I had to be locked in a dark room trying to figure out how to survive this financial meltdown, I'd certainly rather be in there with the head of a local arts agency or an independent nonprofit than, say, the owner of a car dealership. So I think we can handle it. And as President Obama's Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, said, we shouldn't waste a crisis. Or in fact, the actual accurate quote is, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean, and I'm still quoting Rahm, what I mean by that is it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. It's not a beautifully constructed sentence, but we get his thought. So today, as I take on the critical responsibility of being the only thing between you and the main course of your lunch, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Obama presidential transition, say a few words about the major themes of my book, Arts, Inc., which I understand I will be signing copies of later today. And also wrap up with a few final thoughts about what you as arts leaders, those who engage culture and community every day, what you can do to help forge a new, powerful connection between art and public policy. Now, there are many, many tales to be told about the Obama transition. I'm going to focus in on the arts, obviously, how they fared just before, during, and after the 4-month period between the election and the inauguration of Barack Obama as president. Now, Americans for the Arts figured prominently at two very important, very critical points in this process. One at the beginning, one toward the end. And I want to highlight the contributions of your organization that were absolutely critical in moving things ahead. First of all, we know the Obama campaign engaged the arts early on. A veteran Washington writer and TV producer, George Stevens, he was an out-of-the-gate supporter of Obama's presidential campaign. And along with his co-chairman, Margot Lyon, who's a New York-based theatrical producer, Stevens launched the Obama Arts Policy Committee, again, early in the campaign. At about the same time, Americans for the Arts opened a New Hampshire office and requested arts policy statements from primary candidates in both parties. The Obama campaign responded with what is by far the most concrete and expansive set of commitments to the arts ever released by any presidential campaign. And it should come as no surprise that the promises pretty much mirrored the wish list that had been advanced by Americans for the Arts for years, including a budget increase for the NEA, support for individual artists, a more robust cultural diplomacy effort, a new emphasis on arts education, and the creation of an arts corps that would bring artists right into the heart of community life. We are all fortunate that Americans for the Arts was on site with those early primary and already engaged in the campaign. And we're also very fortunate that George Stevens conveyed his interest in the arts to the candidate. That combination converted enthusiasm into some very specific, valuable objectives. Now, I joined that Arts Policy Committee in July. And on September 11th, I was having breakfast with Margot Lyon in New York City, and she asked if I would consider taking on the task of reviewing the NEA in what was a top-secret effort, the Obama Transition Project. It was put together, it was just being organized by John Podesta, head of the Center for American Progress, and who had been Bill Clinton's chief of staff, my boss in a sense, when I was NEA chairman. I was very eager to work with John. I said yes. Now, the Obama project was secret, of course, because if leaked, it would have given the appearance of assuming victory, the classic measuring the drapes of your new office too early. The press and our opponents would have had a field day. So we worked quietly with public documents to prepare background information on federal departments and agencies for the incoming president. We did something called a 30-page roadmap and a 2-page summary of issues, problems, challenges, and campaign promises linked to every aspect of government. My assignment was to compile the roadmap and summary covering the NEA. Now, the project overall, I think, worked brilliantly. The president-elect actually had a fat briefing book with all of these 2-page summaries on every department of agency and government on his desk the day after the election. Although there was no guarantee that those of us who worked on this pre-election transition project would be invited to do so, I was asked to work on the real transition. I was charged with supervising a team conducting agency review of the NEA, NEH, and the IMLS. This is one of the few groups where I don't have to tell you what IMLS stands for, which is it's really a pleasure. I was team leader for arts and humanities, reporting to our group leader, Tom Wheeler, who wrangled a disparate half-dozen teams. They were reviewing agencies like NASA, the FCC, the National Science Foundation, and the entire Department of Commerce. We were all lumped in together. Serving as team leader in the Obama-Biden transition was a full-time, though unpaid job. I took a 9-week leave of absence from Vanderbilt, rented one of those Capitol Hill basement apartments, that interns live in when they're working in Washington, and moved to the city. The entire transition staff met on November 14th. We were photographed for our ID badges, given phone numbers, handed PTT for Presidential Transition Team Blackberries, and escorted to our offices. From that day forward, every weekday morning, most weekends, I got up early, took a quick run, showered, dressed, caught the metro to work on the 7th floor of 451 6th Street Northwest, a Justice Department office building about 10 blocks east of the real White House. The people around me on the 7th floor were mostly, because of the agencies that were in our group, tech, or intellectual property specialists, and many of those are now in senior administration jobs. Now, how did the arts fit in? What was the backdrop? First we had George and Margot, Bob Lynch, Americans for the Arts, President-elect Obama, working with a robust set of campaign promises directed at arts and culture. It's a good backdrop. Second, Tom Wheeler had made the decision by himself, I think, to combine the agency review for those 3 grant-making cultural agencies in one team, under one leader, me. And I think from the outset, this helped me because I was able to talk about the cultural agencies, plural. I think that gave us more weight and standing within the transition process. Now, third, I'll kind of set this aside. There was this drumbeat talking about the creation of an arts czar position in the White House. Legendary composer, arranger, producer Quincy Jones had kind of riffed on the idea during a radio interview, and it morphed into an online petition which had already, by the beginning of the transition, gathered in several thousand names. And it still exists, and of course the Mayor's Conference has itself argued on behalf of this position. I'm a little ambivalent, but that's not what the talk is about. And the fourth element of the background, the economy had begun its meltdown. So, surprise, the campaign commitments and promises quietly morphed into campaign goals. In addition, the economic challenges meant that from the very first week our transition office was up and running, each team leader was asked to come up with ideas on how their agencies could quickly develop and implement spending programs. The stimulus bill was being put together. This became something of a parlor game in which team leaders competed to place jobs programs in the NSF or the Commerce Department and so on. My office mate, he's now a senior White House official, was able to find $1 billion for a research ship. I submitted a memo on December 14th asking for a significant amount of money for the 3 cultural agencies. And finally, as backdrop, we can't underestimate the importance of having a president-elect who had demonstrated an authentic feel for the unique capacity of culture to shape identity and human aspiration. If you haven't already, and few people perhaps haven't, but read Dreams from My Father. If you do so, you'll be engaging the voice of a man who truly understands the value of a vibrant, expressive life. And of course, I was part of the backdrop of the transition as well. I came in very eager to help the Obama administration engage our cultural agencies as effectively and as efficiently as is possible. But I also had my own agenda. My book, Arts, Inc., How Greed and Neglect and so on, which I will be signing here later on today, had just come out. It argues forcefully that market forces and sloppy public policy have pulled our art system away from the public interest. I argue that a fresh engagement with art making and cultural heritage can be a critical route to a high quality of life. But deregulated media and the expanding footprint of copyright has separated citizens from the work of artists, separated them from art from the past and from the tools of creativity. So the book is somewhat critical of the way public policy has engaged art and culture. Responsibility and authority are scattered among dozens of agencies and departments of government, from the FCC across many other agencies, including the NEA, even to Homeland Security. And second, the government has tended to view art as an amenity, what Congressman David Obey calls a legislative grace note. Art is certainly not seen at the federal level, and I think this is less true in the arena in which you work, our cities, but art is certainly not seen as an integrated part of West Wing domestic or foreign policy, the kind of policy regime that would bundle together media ownership, support for nonprofits, copyright, arts learning, trade and cultural goods, and so on. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that my personal goal in the transition was to get the West Wing of the White House, I targeted the Domestic Policy Council, to take on a modest arts and culture portfolio, not pushing to the top for a Quincy Jones-style art czar, but a bundle of issues assigned to perhaps a mid-level Domestic Policy Council staffer who would be charged with connecting the cultural capacity of government with administration objectives. It would be a start. Now, against all of this backdrop, our team was doing its real job, which was agency review, casting a critical eye on Republican-generated personnel, budget, and policy issues in the NEA, NEH, and IMLS, critiquing special initiatives like the Shakespeare Tour, the Big Read, Picturing America, and so on. We met with service organizations, talked on the phone with stakeholders, all with an eye toward drafting a user's manual for each agency, a down-and-dirty playbook for incoming Obama-appointed leadership. Our team also worked to assemble lists of possible candidates for the chairmanships of both endowments. So how did it all turn out? Pretty well, I think. I mean, not only do we have an outstanding administration, my friend Dick Woodruff, who worked with me at the NEA years ago, he now is a federal relations specialist for the American Cancer Society. So, this is the first administration in his memory that came into office and immediately started doing exactly what it promised to do. And I think it's been remarkable. And in the arts, I think that the transition produced a very solid foundation on which to connect culture with a high quality of life for all Americans. I had real standing as the representative of the cultural agencies, and I never felt for a minute that our issues were not just as important as those of NASA, the FCC, or the Department of Commerce. Second, I think I made a little progress in this culture as West Wing policy idea. I'm not sure, but I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that once it's fully staffed, there will be some responsibility for culture in the Domestic Policy Council. And certainly the old model, the First Lady as the office, as the front line of cultural engagement, has hit the ground running with her attendance at a number of important art openings, events in the White House, and so on. And third, I think our agency review process was fair and thorough. Overall, the Obama administration has been remarkably organized and effective right out of the gate. And this, I'm not talking only about our team, but right across the board. Valerie Jarrett and John Podesta and others who led the transition, I think, did a first-rate job. And I think we have an excellent incoming chairman in Rocco Landsman and an excellent incoming NEH chairman in Jim Leach. Off to the side, as Mayor Nichols mentioned, Norm Dixon, the House of Representatives, has been very supportive, and he's been able only within the last couple of weeks to indicate that he would increase the requests, the White House request for NEA and NEH funding to $170 million, which I think is terrific. But it is terrific. And we must, and there are some challenges. We have to continue to press the administration directly, as well as through Chairman Landsman, when he's confirmed, and his staff, to implement the goals that were set out in the campaign. The Arts Corps, expanded commitment to arts education, strengthening cultural diplomacy, and so on. This administration has moved methodically, sometimes not as quickly as some would like, but it's moved methodically to implement the goals that were set forward in the campaign. So I think we can be very optimistic, but that doesn't mean we should not continue to press, just as we did during the campaign, to make sure that these commitments are fulfilled. And this is where I'd like to begin to wrap up and talk a bit about where I think local arts agencies and nonprofits at the community level can really play a critical role. Because what's needed today, perhaps it's exaggerated, exacerbated by the economic downturn, but what's needed today is a stronger frame within which to argue the value of cultural vibrancy as a public good. Remember, we have what I would call an instinctive cultural president, Barack Obama. But he didn't bring a very big posse with him to Washington. The Clinton administration veterans, I'm one of them, we served at every level in the transition, and many have entered government. Now, mostly I think this is a good thing. But, these old hands are also reservoirs of conventional wisdom about the arts, conventional wisdom that is often reinforced by attitudes on Capitol Hill. A revealing story from the transition, I mentioned that I tried to get a significant amount of money included in the economic recovery bill for all three cultural grant makers. I met with John Podesta to pitch this idea. He said, I don't want any money in the stimulus package for the NEA. If the endowment is mentioned, Republicans will attack and use it as a wedge to go after the entire bill. Then he said, "You'll get more money later." No, I'd heard that before. So I moved to the side and scheduled a meeting with Peter Orszag, who was the transition budget guru. He is now White House budget director, the head of OMB. Listed all the ways in which our cultural agencies were poised to distribute money through established national peer-reviewed grant programs. Made the whole pitch. But in the end, I went personal. And I won't tell you the details, but I basically threatened to hold my breath till I turned blue if there was no money for culture in this stimulus package. And nothing happened, but just before, literally as we were closing down the transition office, Tom Killar down the hall, who'd been tracking every penny that found its way into that bill, came running down the hall. "You got $50 million for the NEA." And of course, John Podesta was right. The Republicans attacked. Not only was the money not included in the Senate version of the bill, but as Mayor Nichols noted, Oklahoma's Tom Coburn introduced the cynical, dismissive amendment that somehow lumped art centers and highway beautification in with gambling casinos and dry heat saunas. Now, here's the second point in this whole process where Americans for the Arts stood tall. By rallying phone and email support from all over the country, and by, among other things, getting Robert Redford to phone House Speaker Pelosi, your organization really saved the day. I am convinced that without your efforts, that $50 million would have gone away. So thank you for that. And our mayor alluded to this point, but to me, the fight over the stimulus money produced a new and very helpful debate. Are artists real workers? Are they part of the real economy? Are arts organizations real businesses? Well, the answer, of course, ultimately was yes. And then, no surprise, I've heard that the agency's jobs program is viewed by OMB within the administration as one of the best. It doesn't surprise me a bit. And I think we need to stand tall in this kind of space, because in my memory, this is the first time the endowment has been engaged as an instrument of mainstream policy implementation, policy that was not about arts or culture. Art was suddenly not an amenity, but it was a vehicle for sustaining and strengthening communities through job creation. And this is not new at the local level, but it's something very new at the federal level. Now, our Obama transition was all about change. But as Chicago columnist Sidney Harris wrote years ago, we hate change and we love it at the same time. What we really want is for things to remain the same but get better. And I think that's a telling statement. I think today we know enough to understand that if things are going to get better, they really can't remain the same. And I think one thing we have to avoid during this period of economic crisis is use it as a way for not confronting the very real issues that are only ours. We can't blame everything that's happening to us on the collapse of the global economy. And, you know, Chris Matthews, I was watching, I'm addicted to MSNBC, I'm a known Democrat, and so I'm addicted to watching MSNBC. And Chris Matthews mentioned in passing, talking about the current state of the Republican Party, that being a victim is a warm, cozy place. And I think we also, as well as we improvise around finances, we also play the victim really well. So let's not talk about change when all we mean that things should stay the same but get better. So let's not, to go back to Rahm Emanuel's phrase, let's not waste this crisis. I believe that local arts agencies are at the very front lines of a new way, a totally new way of valuing art and art making. In Arts, Inc., I introduced the idea of expressive life. Expressive life has two things: heritage and voice. Heritage is all about history, tradition, family, tribe, belonging, nationality. The Suquamish performers that we heard earlier are all about cultural heritage, about identity. The other half of expressive life is voice, and that's about imagination, longing, creativity, individual accomplishment, being different, being cosmopolitan. It's about, in a sense, autonomy. So you have identity and autonomy, heritage and voice. Take it together, that's our expressive life. If citizens possess identity through heritage and autonomy through creative practice, they will live in a sustainable community, whether that community is wealthy or not. I'll say it again. If you have identity through heritage, autonomy through creative practice, you will live in a sustainable community. Mike, would you put up, there's a slide. It's interesting. I think the arts community is moving in on this. Your graphic for your program book could be seen as a representation of what expressive life is all about. If you look at the bottom, the roots, heritage, you see words like community, trust, share, humanity, nurture, join. If you look at the tree, this is where you find not only all of the art forms, the doing, but you find what I would call voice. You have sing, live, fun, create, play, all the art forms. Now, there are other things in there. It's not a perfect mirror of my idea of expressive life, but it's very, very close, and I think we're heading in that direction. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about heritage. It's not enough to say heritage is about the symphony on Thursday. Voice is not being the third chair clarinet or the third marching clarinetist in the marching band. There's more to it than that. But it allows us an opportunity, I think, if we believe in heritage, voice, and expressive life, to redefine our arena and make it bigger and make it more important. Of course, cultural nonprofits will be part of it, but we're also going to have to talk about, as cultural leaders, about cable television and internet penetration in poor neighborhoods. We're going to have to talk about and think about live music in nightclubs, about independent bookstores, record stores in our community, about music instruction not in schools but in retail stores, about the number of foreign films that make their way to screens in the multiplex, about the character of public access TV, and on and on. A number of other markers of cultural vitality that we haven't thought deeply about but are just outside the boundaries of our current vision. Now, I think Americans for the Arts is doing this, assembling national indicators of creative vitality. West Staff's Creative Vitality Index, which used 8 indicators and looked here at Seattle, I think moved in the same direction. The Pew analysis of participation in Philadelphia and beyond, we're all thinking in the same direction. I think it's time to bring this together. We're moving in on the idea from the margins. And I think it makes a big difference because if we get it right, we can talk not about arts in sustaining communities, but the way in which arts sustain communities. Think of the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. We have folks from Louisiana and New Orleans here. I bet we do. Maybe we don't. The Ninth Ward is a poor neighborhood that's creative and deeply connected with its heritage. When it was damaged, destroyed, what needed to be rebuilt wasn't just about its material well-being, its sense of expressive life, heritage, and creativity needed to be brought back. It was a poor neighborhood that was sustained by creativity and heritage. You have access to these issues on the front lines that national leaders simply don't have. You have a bigger toolkit than grant making. You have relationships with your mayor's offices, with your historical society, with the Chamber of Commerce and business leaders. You can convene meetings. You can certainly study your community and assess cultural vitality in a new and broader way. Money, after all, giving grants is frequently a very blunt instrument. There are many things that you, as leaders of local arts agencies, can do other than simply give away money. So as I conclude, I think there are 3 things I'd like you to take away from my comments. First, I think you have to trust your national leadership. Many of these local issues connect directly to policies around intellectual property, grant making, trade, that flow down to the local level. And I think in the election and the post-election work of Americans for the Arts in relation to the cultural scene, your organization has demonstrated a capacity to track issues, to get engaged, and make policy changes at the highest level. Very, very effective. So when Bob and his cohorts call you and say, here's something you have to get behind it. I think they've demonstrated their ability to do this. The second point is I think you have to continue to work hard to make sure that the Obama administration does follow through on the promises that moved all the way from the campaign through the transition and now reside somewhere in the thinking of the administration. And that you can work with your incoming NEA chairman, its staff, but also to the best of your ability work directly with the administration. The third point is the one that I was just ending with. think we have an opportunity to redefine the relationship between community and culture in a way that can lead to a foundation that will last through the rest of the 21st century. To get there, I think we have to think about art in terms of expressive life. Go back home, look to the left and the right. You know, what is happening? What's getting in the way of access to heritage? What is it that is preventing young people from accessing the tools of personal creativity and achievement? Look at every aspect of your community that helps shape the character of culture. I think if you can make art expressive life, then you will be able to talk not about art in sustaining community, but art as the mechanism that sustains community. Thank you.